Good morning, good afternoon, buen dia, buena tarde, bienvenidos. Welcome to all who are zooming in from across the Western Hemisphere and possibly even further afield. This conversation will occur simultaneously in English and Spanish, so please select your language using the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you prefer to hear the interpreters only without the speaker's voice in the background, please select mute original audio. Many thanks to our interpreters, Clara and Talia, for helping us with the interpretation today. I would also like to welcome our conversation partners, each bringing an important perspective to the discussion. Welcome to Maria Eugenia Brizuela Davila, Luciano Cadoni, Mark Connolly, Nikki Enerson, and Juan Jose Hurtado. I would also like to welcome Alfredo Sanchez Bedoya, our graphic facilitator. Doodling is not only allowed during this session, it is completely encouraged. We recognize that it helps keep our minds and spirits young, and this session is all about young people. I'm so glad you all are here. I am Gillian Huebner, and I'm pleased to be spearheading the new Collaborative on Global Children's Issues at Georgetown University. Our collaborative launched in September with a goal to foster cross-disciplinary research and dialogue on critical and emerging issues affecting children and youth worldwide. As a collaborative, we don't do anything alone. This forum, Innovating Protection for Children on the Move Across the Americas, is a joint effort between partners who have committed to working together to ensure that our conversations are inclusive of a variety of perspectives, including those of young people, community and international organizations, policymakers, researchers, and other stakeholders. Our collaborative design team includes UNICEF, the Global Fund for Children, and its network of local civil society organizations on both sides of the border, and 2 youth-serving organizations in the DC metro area, Identity and Imagination Stage. At Georgetown, this forum is supported by the Americas Institute, the Institute for the Study of International Migration, and the Office of the Vice President for Global Engagement. Together, we are committed to ensuring that this forum is centered around young people, grounded in their lived experiences and those of their families and communities, responsive to current and emerging needs, and useful to actors working in a variety of contexts, and solutions oriented. The conversation is also taking place on our online platform. We will share a link to our blog series in the chat. Take a look, it's an inspiring mosaic of voices and perspectives, all relevant to this topic. The webinar is being recorded and the video will be posted to the event page of our website soon. And if you are registered for today's event, you will also receive an email with our video when it becomes available. In the last 10 to 15 minutes, we'll try to answer questions from the audience, so please feel free to engage in the conversation along the way by opening the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen and typing in your question. So now to the topic at hand. The name of this forum, Innovating Protection for Children on the Move Across the Americas, came from a 16-year-old from Honduras. How did we manage to get here? We improvised, he said. The safety we found, we created it ourselves. He went on to detail a series of innovations, most of which he came up with himself or with those on the journey with him, sometimes with the support of a community. He, along with hundreds of thousands of young people who've crossed borders across the Americas, innovated his own pathway to protection. So what does this mean for us? Efforts to respond appropriately to migrant and asylum-seeking children and families do indeed require innovative thinking. Our national and cross-border child protection systems need work. Young people who have lived the migration experience and those who have helped them navigate risk and find protection along the way must inform and guide our collective efforts. Those closest to the challenges are also closest to the solutions, yet their perspectives are rarely prioritized. In this forum, we are considering the whole child on a whole migration journey, Today's conversation focuses on children's experiences at home in their countries of origin before they leave. Our webinar series will follow these young people along the full migration journey. Our webinar on April 22nd will focus on innovating protection along the migratory route and at the US-Mexico border. And on May 4th, we will focus on innovating protection for migrant and asylum-seeking children in US communities. We hope to ground all of these conversations in the lived experiences of young people who have migrated. And so today we're going to begin with a clip from Oyame, a play that was created by young people who journeyed from Northern Central America to the DC metro area. The play is one way that migrant youth in our area have chosen to share their experiences while also protecting their identity and their privacy. This scene depicts one girl's conversation with her abuela before she leaves home in Honduras. Please play the video, Mary. Thanks.
Laurita, Honduras no es seguro. Look at me. I can't protect you. Las maras, they are everywhere. I see them. I see how they look at you. You have to go. You have to. For 10 years, tu mami trabajando en sus rodillas por 10 años, saving all her money so you can be with her. She loves you. Your eyes are hers. Tienes los ojos exactamente de tu mami. Don't you want to see her?
I do. You know I do, but...
Bueno, and you will. Y en las USA.
La USA, sí, la USA.
En la USA. You go to a nice school, eh? You be safe for your abuelita. And then when you are older, you will become una profesional, a nurse, o una doctora, eh? And then you will take care of me, tu viejita.
I will. I promise.
The whole play is extraordinarily powerful, created by young people who've experienced the migration journey themselves. And I hope you'll get to see the full thing. Imagination Stage's theater workshops continue to take place in more than 25 English language learner classrooms in the DC metro area during the school day. And the play has reached more than 7,000 audience members. It's another creative way that young migrants have found protection and healing with the support of their community. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Juan Jose Hurtado, the Executive Director of Asociación PAPNOJ in Guatemala. Migration from Guatemala to the United States has risen dramatically in recent years, most of it stemming from poor rural areas in the Western Highlands. The majority of children who cross the US-Mexico border unaccompanied are from Guatemala, and many are indigenous Mayans. Migration has become an increasingly common pathway for these young people to escape poverty, food insecurity, violence, and corruption. But it also exposes them to other risks, including separation from their families and their culture. Mr. Hurtado, among other things, your organization has focused on working with young people and families before they migrate, as well as upon their return, if the attempt to migrate has been unsuccessful. To build a sense of rootedness and security, what does this look like in the communities of the Western Highlands?
Bueno, voy a hablar en español porque me siento más a gusto hablando en mi idioma materno. Gracias, Gillian, por la pregunta. Antes de responder, quisiera explicar primero sobre qué es PAPNOJ. Nosotros somos una asociación civil guatemalteca, no lucrativa, no partidista, que trabaja con un enfoque de pueblos indígenas. Esto quiere decir que además de trabajar con comunidades mayas, lo hacemos valorando en su historia, su identidad, su cultura y su forma propia de ver, entender y vivir en el mundo, una fuerza para construir alternativas de vida que procuren bienestar material y espiritual, individual y colectivo para humanidad, madre naturaleza y cosmos. Y es desde este enfoque que llegamos a trabajar en el tema de migración, pues no se puede hablar de pueblos indígenas en Guatemala sin considerar la migración. No solo es que la mayoría de quienes migran son indígenas, sino que los efectos mayores de la migración, para bien y para mal, se están viviendo en las comunidades indígenas. Recordemos que, como bien dices, no solo son quienes viajan, sino también quienes se quedan. Las familias se desestructuran, el tejido social se ve afectado, es decir, es una rasgadura, y Guatemala está perdiendo el llamado bono poblacional, porque la mayoría de la población de Guatemala es joven, es un potencial, pero está migrando, se está perdiendo. También hay que decir que los pueblos indígenas tienen una manera distinta de entender la migración. De hecho, en los idiomas mayas no existe la palabra migración. Lo que se habla es del viajero, del caminante. Y también recordemos que las fronteras no fueron creación de los pueblos, sino que les fueran impuestos. De hecho, por eso tenemos población maya mam en Guatemala y en México, población maya Echí en Guatemala y en Belice, población maya Chortí en Guatemala y Honduras. Es decir, a los pueblos se les ha separado por fronteras impuestas. En el caso del área donde nosotros trabajamos, no es en los centros urbanos y no es por violencia de pandillas que la gente está saliendo, como el ejemplo que vimos con el video, sino que efectivamente la mayoría de migrantes del altiplano de Guatemala están migrando por razones de pobreza extrema, falta de empleo, y esto se ha incrementado en los últimos años y sobre todo en el contexto de la pandemia y la crisis política permanente que vive el país. La migración, como sabemos, es multicausal, pero efectivamente para Guatemala las razones económicas son las de mayor peso. Sin embargo, hay que decir que la gente no es pobre por naturaleza, o mucho menos porque no trabaja, sino que la población ha sido empobrecida a lo largo de la historia. Para la historia de Guatemala, el punto de arranque de este empobrecimiento es la invasión que sufrió en el siglo XVIII, que despojó a los pueblos originarios de sus medios de vida y los obligó a desplazarse. No es casualidad que las tierras más productivas estén en la costa sur y que los pueblos indígenas hayan sido arrinconados hacia el altiplano occidental. De manera que la pobreza es un reflejo del sistema racista, clasista y patriarcal que ha construido a lo largo de varios siglos. Y si se quiere abordar las causas de raíz, como se dice ahora, significa construir una forma distinta de vida. Volviendo al trabajo que POPNOC realiza en relación a la migración, este es con un enfoque de derechos humanos que reconoce el derecho a migrar, el derecho a no migrar y el derecho a un retorno digno. Cuando hablamos del derecho a no migrar es que deberían de haber condiciones en el país para que la gente no se viera forzada a migrar. Sin embargo, en su mayoría, la gente que se va de Guatemala, y en este caso los jóvenes y la niñez, se están desplazando no totalmente de forma voluntaria, sino de una manera forzada. Como nos dijo alguien en una oportunidad, nadie deja su casa por gusto. Es decir, insistimos, no se trata de una migración totalmente voluntaria, es una migración forzada y muchas veces por una decisión desesperada. Y hay que decir que en Guatemala, debido al mal gobierno, a la corrupción, a la impunidad, no existe confianza en la población de que las cosas puedan mejorar. Y si no hay esperanza, la opción es migrar. En ese sentido, deben tomarse medidas más drásticas y enérgicas para combatir la corrupción, la impunidad y vigilar que el Estado cumpla con sus responsabilidades al servicio de sus ciudadanos. En cuanto a lo que hacemos nosotros como POCNOG, nosotros estamos acompañando a niñez migrante que regresa de Estados Unidos y de México. Acompañamos el momento de la reunificación familiar y también damos un acompañamiento a lo largo de un año como promedio para contribuir a que la reinserción sea efectiva. En este caso, para mí es una palabra clave acompañar. Nosotros, y eso lo hacemos muy claro siempre a la población con la que trabajamos, no le vamos a resolver la vida a nadie. Cada quien es responsable de su propia vida. Pero el acompañamiento es facilitar cosas, brindar información, crear mecanismos, contribuir a que ese proceso se pueda dar de manera satisfactoria. Y nuestra visión es de un acompañamiento integral que incluye efectivamente en algunos momentos asistencia humanitaria, como es brindar alimentación, apoyo económico, atender la salud física, porque también las y los niños en la migración sufren afectaciones, por ejemplo, de la piel, problemas digestivos, problemas respiratorios. Un tema clave es la salud emocional y que la atendemos con un enfoque de atención psicosocial, porque la migración, solo salir del mundo conocido para enfrentarse a un mundo desconocido es un hecho traumático. Si a eso se agrega todo lo que ocurre en la ruta, la detención, la separación familiar, la incertidumbre, el retorno y la sensación de fracaso, las afectaciones para niños y niñas y sus familias es profundo. De ahí que la misma experiencia nos ha dicho, tenemos que dar una atención psicosocial a los niños, sus familias y a las comunidades. Asimismo, es clave buscar alternativas educativas, que los niños y las niñas se reinserten en el sistema escolar y buscar otras alternativas, dependiendo de la edad, eventualmente formación vocacional. Asimismo, hay que atender aspectos legales, por ejemplo, actas de nacimiento, otros documentos que hay que validar, etcétera. Un tema clave para nosotros y por nuestra propia naturaleza es el reforzamiento de la identidad y la cultura. Sobre todo que cuando la espera en Estados Unidos se prolonga, los niños con frecuencia dejan de hablar su idioma, se acostumbran a otro tipo de cultura y el regreso significa un choque. Y entonces también hay que crear condiciones para que esta transición se pueda dar. Y lo más difícil de todo, pero es indispensable, es buscar alternativas económicas para que la reinserción se haga efectiva. Este acompañamiento lo hacemos en el idioma propio, es decir, las personas que acompañan son personas de los lugares donde estamos trabajando, que hablan el idioma, que entienden el contexto y que lo hacen con una pertinencia cultural. Sin embargo, nosotros somos conscientes que estamos atendiendo una pequeña parte de la situación, pero que hay que abordar de manera más profunda las causas de la migración. Y de ahí que para nosotros es también vital y fundamental hacer un trabajo de incidencia a distintos niveles, a nivel local, municipal, en el país y también de manera regional. En un reciente informe que presentamos con el MPI, destacamos la necesidad de construir alternativas a la migración para que sea una migración regular. La migración no se va a detener. Por más muros que se construyan, la migración no se detiene, mientras no cambie la situación que forza a la población a salir. Por lo tanto, lo que hay que crear son condiciones adecuadas para que haya una migración ordenada y regular. Y en el caso de Guatemala, y especialmente de comunidades indígenas, donde hay un arraigo profundo, se puede crear mecanismos de migración circular que eviten esos riesgos y que permitan a la gente regresar a sus comunidades. También hay que promover el desarrollo local. Los pueblos tienen capacidades, tienen medios, pueden hacer muchas cosas. Y lejos de pensar en soluciones desde arriba, pensemos en soluciones desde abajo, desde lo comunitario. Y eso implica también invertir en los actores locales. Creo que el reto para nosotros es crear condiciones distintas para la niñez, porque la niñez tiene derecho a una vida plena, segura, y está en nosotros, en los adultos, y principalmente en los estados, la responsabilidad de crear esas condiciones. Muchas gracias, espero que esto nos ayude a reflexionar en relación a por qué la gente migra y que son personas, que son niños y niñas que merecen un trato humano.
Thank you so much, Juan Jose. That was really powerful. And I think I'm going to stick with your language of referring to these young people as travelers and walkers who deserve our accompaniment at all stages of the journey. In so many ways, you actually just framed the conversation as migration as an innovation, right? It's an innovative way of seeking protection. And I think your focus also on identity and culture as protective factors is something that we need to recognize all throughout the migration journey, from countries of origin to how we receive these young people in their communities, or in our communities in the United States. Do we recognize the culture that they came from, the language that they speak, and can we accompany them in their arrival here with respect for those facets of their identities? So thank you so much. So now let's bring Mark Connolly into the conversation. Mr. Connolly is the UNICEF representative in Honduras. So in the video clip that we saw, Laura and her grandmother refer to violence in their community. And UNICEF is leading some really innovative efforts to interrupt the violence in Honduras. So some background for our listeners. In 2019, the government of Honduras launched the Violence Against Children and Youth Survey, which was the first of its kind in Latin America. And the report included groundbreaking information on the intersections of violence against children and the impact of that violence on migration. 2 years later, Honduras launched a national action plan to end violence against children. But of course, it's one thing to develop a plan and another thing to implement it. So how is it going, Mark?
Thank you, Jillian, and thank you everyone who's tuned in for this discussion. As you know, the topic of the session is around innovation. And it's important to recognize that when it comes to violence against children, there's often not a lot of innovation. Historically in the region, it's been do anything and call it preventing violence, but without measuring whether you actually prevented any violence at all. It's great to do all the out of school sports programs and everything supplemental to regular school, but there's very limited evidence on how that has actually reduced violence. So in Honduras really took advantage of the VAC survey, Violence Against Children survey, which is $1 million investment to gather data at household level to just get a better sense on what type of violence is going on in the households and in the communities. And then, as you said, Jillian, it may seem pretty routine to develop a national action plan, but again, there aren't many countries in the region that have national action plans signed at presidential level to reduce violence against children. So the innovation there is you got to get the leadership from the top to be able to do the work that Juan Jose said from the bottom, especially when it comes to themes of violence, and especially in countries where organized crime and gangs are usually the main players in poor communities. So we focused really with our partners here in Honduras on two main areas. One is literally reducing violence, reducing femicide, reducing homicide. And then on the other hand, at the same time, strengthening protective environments. What do I mean by that? We go back to what Juan Jose was saying. You go to the communities where there's high levels of femicide, homicide. Obviously, there's lots of children there. If you look at the correlations in Honduras, those are also the places where you have the highest numbers of children migrating, children fleeing their communities because primarily of violence. All of us in this call know that migration is multi-causal, and one family can have 10 reasons to leave. But if you look at those variables and you look on where you're going to put your money, where you're going to put your time and interest, and where you're going to get the community's buy-in, you can't ignore the violence. You can't do income generation, extracurricular, and 10 other very important things for children's development. But if you don't touch femicide, homicide, those are the big detonators. That's why people finally decide to hit the road. It's often domestic violence. It's also where there's organized crime, organized violence. Very specifically, zooming in on that, here in Honduras, we've teamed up with international NGO Cure Violence Global. Cure Violence takes a public health approach to reducing homicide and femicide. What do I mean by that? If you look at the murder maps of Honduras or Jamaica or New Orleans or Baltimore or Chicago, you see outbreaks of homicide, you see outbreaks of femicide, you see clustering, just like you do when you get outbreaks of COVID or outbreaks of dengue or outbreaks of tuberculosis. So from a public health point of view, an epidemiological point of view, you got to go into those clusters where the epidemic, in this case of homicide, femicide, is occurring, and you've got to interrupt that transmission, the transmission of murder, of homicide. So the Cure Violence approach to this, which works in many countries around the world and many cities of the United States, is to really focus on who's committing the violence and map out where the homicides and femicide take place. In this part of the world, we call them, hot communities where things are never stable. And then you have outreach workers from the community, not from UNICEF, not from central government, not from the police force, but people from the community who are then paid to be, in other countries or in other scenarios, we would call health promoters. Or the best example is, when you have an outbreak of tuberculosis and people have to take pills every day for 9 months, those people benefit greatly from someone visiting their house every other day just to make sure they take the medicine. Because if you have one break of a week of not taking the meds, your whole TB reduction goes down the drain. Same is true for violence. You get these outreach workers, social workers, health promoters, whatever you want to call them, but they're from the community, and their job is to listen to what's going on in the community and then find ways to interrupt the violence from taking place. That can be by engaging with the perpetrators and basically distracting them to go to another place or to do something else. But more often than not, here in Honduras, in reducing femicide, it's a matter of getting the women and her children out of harm's way, physically moving them, getting them out of the neighborhood, getting them out of the town. I say this is the area where we've had the greatest success is because we've been able to reduce femicide. In a lot of these communities where organized crime and poverty prevail and migration is high, if people on the ground are paying attention to the tension and the arguments and the kind of negative vibes in the community, it's very easy to pick up which women are going to be killed. Why? Because the guy who's going to kill them is kind of announcing it. I'm going to kill her. There's no secret. People know who's targeted and people know who the perpetrators are. So the intervention there is literally, many cases, get a minivan and pack up the women and the kids and go somewhere else. Go where they have friends, where they have family, where they have neighbors, not international migration, maybe just 20 kilometers away, but get them out of the hotspot. So I mentioned that as just one example, but because we have the violence against children surveys and the database, we're able to measure those reductions. It's not just tracking homicide and femicide rates, it's tracking all rates of violence against children and violence committed by children. And as I said at the very beginning, if you really want to have an impact on the 20 variables which are root causes for migration, if you don't touch the violence one, it'll be very hard to get any progress on reducing people fleeing violent communities. I'll stop there. It's very well documented on the Cure Violence Global website, cvg.org. It's been strongly supported by the government of Honduras, both the past one and the present one. And again, as Juan Jose said, you know, at the end of the day, these are all decisions made and interventions made in the most affected communities by the most affected people. UNICEF's role is a combination of data collection, training, and supporting the government and the communities to make sure that these interrupters, these outreach workers, have a salary, feel safe, and are proud of their work. And what we learned in the COVID epidemic, you know, when the police left those communities because of COVID, because of lockdowns, these people stepped up as health promoters, as COVID prevention promoters, as mask distributors, as vaccination coordinators in this year. So it's kind of a multi-purpose public health intervention where homicide and femicide are the reductions you want to see, but there's all sorts of side benefits, including the reduction of forced migration due to violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think it's so important in this conversation to underscore that governments can be innovative too, right? And the Honduran government taking both data collection seriously and also actualizing the response, not just documenting a plan, but actually implementing it and tracking the data in a way that we can all use. And we'll put in the chat some of the information about that program. And then also just the Cure Violence approach, using an epidemiological approach to violence prevention is so remarkable. I mean, I know about that work primarily from violence affected communities in the United States, including in Washington, DC. And it's just extraordinary to see how that work is being implemented in other parts of the world equally as effectively. So thank you so much for sharing that whole array of activity with us. It's indeed hopeful. So now let's consider the role of faith actors. Luciana Cardoni is a program officer for the protection of the rights of the child with the regional office for Latin America and the Caribbean at Church World Service. Luciano, the role of faith actors in providing protection for young people in their communities can't be understated. And your organization is specifically involved with supporting children in fragile care environments, including those whose parents have been incarcerated. How are faith-based partners across the region working together to innovate protection for children at risk?
Thanks, Gillian. I'll also switch to Spanish as Juan José did. Para empezar, la respuesta corta a esa pregunta y sobre la que voy a elaborar más adelante sería: trabajamos en alianza junto, como vos dijiste, con organizaciones de diferentes credos y con vasta experiencia de trabajo a nivel comunitario, con niños, niñas y familiares que viven en una situación de vulnerabilidad, junto con quienes intentamos identificar y analizar las diferentes problemáticas, aquellas que son visibles y las no tan visibles, relacionadas a la violencia a la que ellos y ellos se enfrentan, y juntos tratamos de encontrar respuestas a esas problemáticas de diferentes enfoques sobre los que voy a hablar más adelante. Como mencionaste, yo trabajo en la Oficina Regional para América Latina y el Caribe de Church World Service, de CWS. CWS soy una de las organizaciones que integran la Alianza por la Protección de la Niñez, que es una coalición de más de 55 organizaciones y comunidades de fe religiosas de diferentes credos, comprometidas con llevar adelante acciones que contribuyan con la erradicación de la violencia y sobre todo preocupadas en atender el impacto que esta violencia tiene en la vida de miles y millones de niños, niñas, adolescentes que crecen en esas poblaciones. La Alianza tiene 4 objetivos principales, algunos de los cuales ya se nombraron: generar acciones colectivas de prevención de la violencia contra la niñez y sus familias, fortalecer también el rol protector que cumplen las comunidades y organizaciones basadas en la fe, sobre todo a nivel comunitario, generar un espacio de intercambio, diálogo, investigación y aprendizaje en materia de cuestiones relacionadas a la violencia contra la niñez y cómo enfrentarla, y también, como se habló, en la incidencia en políticas públicas a nivel nacional y subregional. En relación a esto de generar conocimiento, hace unos años la Alianza elaboró una guía que se llama la Guía para la Prevención de la Violencia contra la Niñez y que se puede encontrar en la página de la Alianza, la cual fue producida a partir de un proceso participativo que incorporó saberes de estas organizaciones que están en el terreno y además incluyó consultas con jóvenes y niños afectados por la violencia de México y Honduras. En términos generales, la guía lo que busca es brindar herramientas útiles para el trabajo que las organizaciones de fe realizan a nivel comunitario, propone estrategias y acciones de prevención tanto primaria, secundaria como terciaria que pueden ser implementadas. Y para la implementación de esas actividades se proponen 6 diferentes enfoques, sobre los cuales voy a hablar en profundidad sobre 2 en particulares. Los enfoques son el enfoque de derechos humanos, y también creo que se dijo, ¿no?, el reconocer al niño como un sujeto de derecho, a los estados como que quienes son los garantes principales de esos derechos, y a nosotros y a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil como quienes debemos colaborar en esa promoción y protección de derechos de los niños, y quienes también debemos vigilar para que los estados cumplan con su función. Los otros enfoques son el enfoque de género, que también se habló hace un rato y José hizo alusión al mismo, el enfoque sistémico, el enfoque psicosocial, el enfoque de curso de vida, y el enfoque ético-espiritual, que nos parece una particularidad de nuestra alianza, que es el generar oportunidades para alimentar los valores del respeto, la empatía, la solidaridad, la responsabilidad y la reconciliación, y va por fuera de lo religioso, va más en un enfoque, como decía yo, desde lo ético y lo espiritual, es apoyar la construcción de relaciones y puentes de confianza y nutrir el desarrollo espiritual de los niños, que aunque está reconocido en la Convención de los Derechos del Niño, muchas veces lo dejamos de lado, o no lo tenemos tan en cuenta como otros derechos que tal vez suenan más importantes. En la guía además se analizan en profundidad algunas de las causas de la violencia y de las consecuencias que tienen en la vida de los mismos, sobre las que no voy a hablar porque ya se habló bastante. En base a estos contenidos y en base a que se produce la guía, se decide poner la guía en acción, y eso se traduce en un proyecto que se llama el Proyecto Prevenir, el cual hemos empezado su primera fase, su fase piloto, gracias al apoyo de la Iglesia Luterana de América y de CWS, y a partir de la cual esperamos alcanzar a 2.000 niños, niñas y adolescentes y sus familias en diferentes comunidades de los 4 países, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador y México, y que el proyecto piloto será implementado por 9 organizaciones basadas en la fe que son miembros de la Alianza. Los grupos meta, y acá me salgo un poquito del tema migratorio, son los niños que viven en comunidades en riesgo, en hotspots, creo, o no sé cuál fue el término que utilizó Mark, básicamente comunidades controladas por maras o por pandillas, niños en situación de movilidad humana definitivamente, y que se enfrentan a todos los riesgos que vimos tanto en el video, que la niña tenía miedo, o que Juan José nombró. Y un tercer grupo que son los niños, niñas, adolescentes que tienen a padres o madres o referentes adultos privados de libertad. Y sobre este último punto me quisiera detener un poquito y quisiera profundizar, ya que nosotros, y en este caso hablo de CWS y plataforma NAPES, NAPES es la abreviatura para niños, niñas, adolescentes con padres encarcelados, es una plataforma de 10 organizaciones de 9 países, que trabajamos básicamente en relación a esta temática, la de los niños, niñas y adolescentes que están en esta situación de tener a un referente adulto privado de libertad. Y en este caso me parece que lo que se ha hecho con el proyecto Prevenir y lo que ha hecho la Alianza es de alguna manera una innovación. Nosotros nos acercamos al tema alrededor del año 2011, cuando el Comité de Derechos del Niño tuvo su día de debate general y luego del mismo emitió recomendaciones a los estados y a la sociedad civil sobre cómo enfrentar la problemática. Desde aquel momento Básicamente una cosa que hicimos y que fue clave y que Gillian, tú lo has nombrado y se ha nombrado y es un poco el corazón de este webinar y de todo lo que estamos haciendo, lo que empezamos a hacer fue escucharlos, hacer visibles y hacer escuchadas sus voces. Eso lo tradujimos en investigaciones y en acciones de incidencia. Pero sus mensajes se transformaron para nosotros en todo lo que pudimos pedir y lo que venimos pidiendo desde aquel momento a los gobiernos. Entendimos, como lo reconoce el Centro para el Control de las Enfermedades de los Estados Unidos, el CDC, que el encarcelamiento de un progenitor es de hecho una experiencia adversa de la infancia, que tiene una particularidad muy especial y única, que es que presenta en estos niños una combinación muy particular de trauma, estigma y vergüenza. Todo esto nosotros lo hemos podido constatar a partir de estudios cuantitativos y cualitativos, como por ejemplo un estudio que hicimos junto a la Oficina Nacional de UNICEF aquí en Argentina y con la Procuración Penitenciaria de la Nación, que cuando esta situación ocurre, pasan muchas cosas al interior de la familia y de los hogares. Lo primero es el empobrecimiento. Una situación que ya era vulnerable y muy compleja desde lo económico, se vuelve aún más compleja. Todo el shock que se genera en la vida de los niños y las familias, particularmente si vivenciaron el allanamiento o el momento de la detención, y además en la vida de los niños se genera una asunción de nuevos roles, que incluso pueden resultar en que los niños tengan o que dejar la escuela para ayudar a sus familias en cuestiones de cuidado o de generación de ingreso. Por otro lado, también lo que hicimos, ante la falta de estadísticas oficiales sobre el tema, tomamos algunas estadísticas penitenciarias, algunos otros datos de otras encuestas y pudimos estimar, en el marco de una investigación que presentamos en el 2019, que se llama Niñez que Cuenta, que en la región hay alrededor de 2.3 millones de niños, niñas, adolescentes que están en esta situación, y de esos casi 500.000 se encuentra entre Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador y México. Básicamente lo que hicimos con esto, con toda esta información, fue tratar de compartirla con otros y sensibilizar y hacer acciones de incidencia política con actores claves en relación al tema. Y con un hilo conductor, de nuevo vuelvo a reiterar, que fue principal, que fue las voces de los chicos mismos. Han habido eventos, como uno que se dio en el 2019 en la Corte Suprema de Justicia de Guatemala, o uno que se dio el año pasado ante la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, donde los mismos niños presentaron su mirada y sus recomendaciones a actores claves. Y en todo este tránsito nos parecía importante también traer a ser parte del juego a las organizaciones basadas en la fe, como lo somos nosotros, como lo es CWS. Entendíamos que otros actores basados en la fe, sobre todo aquellos que trabajan a nivel comunitario, debían conocer la problemática. ¿Por qué? Y acá vuelvo a un punto que Gillian, tú nombraste cuando me presentaste. Muchas veces se subestima el papel el que los actores religiosos pueden tener en la protección de la niñez. Nosotros estamos convencidos, y se vio claro, por lo menos en nuestra tarea durante la pandemia, que como decía Mark en relación a estos actores comunitarios, las iglesias y las comunidades de fe que quedaron en las comunidades pudieron llegar y pudieron brindar un servicio que muchos otros no pudieron o no pudimos brindar. De hecho, en la guía se dice, los actores de fe contribuyen significativamente al desarrollo integral de los niños, especialmente al desarrollo espiritual, tienen un amplio alcance e influencia en América Latina, como decía, y desempeñan un papel clave en todo el ciclo de vida de una persona. Por eso nos parecía clave generar esta alianza, y nos parece clave también hacérselo saber a ustedes, y nos parecen clave estos espacios que definitivamente agradecemos para poder contarles que, como se dice en algunos documentos de política pública, hay actores que creo que están subutilizados, que tienen muchísima legitimidad a nivel comunitario y que pueden colaborar en todas estas estrategias que son multicausales, a las cuales tenemos que enfrentar de diferentes lugares y que estamos abiertos a colaborar en ella. Y para cerrar, si me permitís, también voy a traer a colación una frase que Héctor, un joven de Nicaragua, dijo en aquel evento que nombré, que hicimos en 2019 en Guatemala. Él dijo: los adultos tienen que entender que a los niños nos cuesta mucho cargar con el peso que cae sobre nosotros cuando uno de nuestros familiares queda privado de libertad. Para mí esa fue una frase que nunca más me olvidé, Y yo creo que más allá de los chicos que están en esta situación, los niños que pueden estar en riesgo de emigrar o en situaciones de violencia, deben de alguna manera sentir ese peso que recae sobre sus espaldas. Entonces, si de este encuentro, de esta reunión, de este intercambio, pueden surgir colaboraciones, articulaciones, se puede empezar a tener en cuenta mejor el rol de los actores religiosos para que juntos podamos hacer de alguna manera disminuir ese peso que cae sobre los chicos, entonces vamos a celebrar y nos va a parecer que este encuentro y esto que estamos haciendo ha valido aún más la pena. Así que eso, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Luciana. That's such a reminder. And so much of what you talked about made me think of the young people that we hear in the future video clips that we'll play from OMA and the voice recordings that we're incorporating into this series. So many of the young people say that it was their faith that protected them along the way. That was in fact the only thing that they could rely on when all else was failing around them. And so you're stitching together this network of faith actors along the whole route in countries of origin and along the way has been so key. And in our next webinar on April 22nd, we'll include Sister Norma Pimentel, who's a key actor at the border. And in our final webinar on the 4th, we'll talk about some of the faith-based action in the United States as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So now I'm pleased to introduce Maria Eugenia Brizuela de Avila, a lawyer from Central America who served as El Salvador's foreign minister or Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1999 to 2004. And she was the first female Minister of Foreign Affairs. So thank you so much for joining us. Child welfare and protection systems in Northern and Central America are understandably overwhelmed and unable to respond to the scale of need. And that's not just a Central American problem, it's a challenge that we see worldwide, especially during the COVID pandemic. But you have been actively engaged in this space since before you were a foreign minister. Where and how are national governments in the region innovating to ensure that children feel safe and protected within their home communities?
Good afternoon, Gillian, and thanks very much for the kind introduction. First, I would like to thank Georgetown's Collaborative on Global Children's Issues for the invitation to participate in this important initiative, Innovating Protection for Children at Risk in the Americas, together with such distinguished panelists. I will keep my observations child-focused based on the definition given by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that a child is a person under the age of 18. I will focus on children at risk and internally displaced. Children are at risk of abuse, abandonment, gang-induced violence, and forced recruitment, as well as the devastating consequences of poverty and the harsh impact of climate change already been stated by those who spoke before me. But take facts. Almost half of Guatemalan children suffer chronic malnutrition. Many children do not have access to effective governmental programs to keep them safe. Evidence thus suggests that the desire to protect their children is one of the main reasons why families decide. I'm co-chair of the North and Central American Task Force on Migration, and I would like to share, and she will always be in our hearts as she was in the heart of these discussions. Our task force considers that while the migration of Central Americans to the US has received considerable attention, those who are forced to leave their homes but remain within the borders of their countries are largely invisible, despite the large and growing numbers we find. These internally displaced persons, and we'll call them IDPs from now on, often remain vulnerable. Gangs track them down and they have difficulties finding housing and jobs, and they face stigma and suspicion. So many IDPs move multiple times in search of safety. When people cannot find safety in their own countries, then they seek protection in other countries. So UNHCR in 2015 reported that 69% of Central American women asylum seekers had been internally displaced before traveling. More recently, a 2020 survey by Médecins Sans Frontières of the Central American seeking medical care that have been displaced internally before setting out. So displaced children suffer from various impacts: emotional disorders, temporary or permanent family separation, loss of income, and interrupted educational processes. So meanwhile, as you have already stated, these are fragile systems. COVID has definitely overwhelmed many of them, but also gang activity that has increasingly impacted them, as well as the climate catastrophes. So ensuring that IDPs are protected and assisted at home, and that they're able to either return home or safely settle elsewhere in the country, that is fundamentally the responsibility of governments. And unfortunately, statistics on the displaced are often lacking, and there are few systematic data for measuring, understanding, and responding to the displacement. UN Refugee Agency reported in 2016 more than gang violence, but you also have hundreds of thousands displaced in Honduras and Guatemala because of back-to-back hurricanes in 2019. So what do we find? Countries that are reluctant to formally recognize this phenomena. So in looking for innovative ways to support displaced children at risk, I want to highlight the public policies that are starting to be established throughout the North and Central American countries. This is new territory for all of them. In let's look first at El Salvador. It passed a law in 2020 on internally displaced people that the UN Refugee Agency says offers a new lease on life for tens of thousands of victims forcibly displaced by the gangs. The law aims to protect, aid, and offer solutions to the victims of forced displacements. So under its provisions, they would gain access to humanitarian aid and have basic rights restored, including effective access, are good examples of ways to support these children. It calls for the creation of a registry of displaced people and the establishment of a national system. It also permits to coordinate humanitarian assistance with housing and temporary shelters, protection, durable solutions included for them to return safely or resettle, as Mark established so well in Honduras for potential victims of femicides. So the law, unfortunately, didn't come about nicely. It was the result of years of civil society activism and responded to a 2018 ruling of the Supreme Court of Justice in response to a demand by the human rights organization Cristosal, presented on behalf of 35 family group members that had been displaced twice before that day, after enduring repeated gang violence because two of the relatives were members of the armed forces, and second, when police fatally wounded one mother in an anti-gang operation after they had relocated to another town. So the law, however, may well have only a modest scope because its implementation hinges on the state's ability to ensure the confidentiality of the victim data, to reduce the gang's territorial control, and to build more capacity, but it is a start. And the law is also reflecting that growing momentum in Central America and beyond to be able to recognize and respond to the phenomena of internal displacement. In Honduras, where there's an estimated 247,000 people displaced by violence, National Congress is considering legislation similar and a new penal code that introduced a crime of internal displacement, punishing with prison sentences from 6 to 9 years those who through violence or intimidation force someone to abandon or change their place of living. Mexico has also introduced legislation to protect IDPs, and Guatemala is trying to innovate responses. We see, for example, a program launched with UNHCR in Guatemala with their Secretariat on Sexual Violence, Exploitation, and Trafficking that features mobile units that will take information about rights and services to where people need them most, preventing these crimes in remote areas of the country. But the government still yet has to better their take on IDPs, and they all have to allocate sufficient funds for these initiatives. I would like to speak also on a regional initiative at government level, and that is the Comprehensive Regional Protection and Solutions Framework. It is in line with a long tradition of regional cooperation in responding to protection challenges. So it is Belize, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and Panama that have adopted this declaration to agree to work together in the ongoing development and implementation of a refugee response framework. And the innovative there is that one of its working groups developed a comprehensive list of recommendations for governments to strengthen their policies on IDPs, again, on internal displaced people. From establishing data systems to implementing legislative work frames to strengthen coordination, especially at local government. So it is clear what governments need to do to protect IDPs, but not all of them can comply fully with the needs. So civil society is filling in organizations, refugee-led and faith-based organizations, particularly Catholic and evangelic organizations. They have the ability to reach communities, internally displaced persons, and those at risk of displacement, often where governments cannot. So all of these efforts should be supported. I would just like to highlight some of Cristosal programs, which is, again, an organization dealing with the displaced. So you had 20 internally displaced families who were reintegrated within, again, working communities. Again, with research, 11-week-long participated research programs where we had 84 North American alumni and 31 Salvadoran alumni graduating from these global schools. And also, the most important and one of its kind is filing strategic litigation, where I have already expressed one result. We're filing 4 Supreme Court cases on behalf of families displaced by violence and have made strides in the Salvadoran courts. So actions taken by Cristosal and so many other NGOs are complementing, but as I said, it's not enough. We need to continue our task force, a layered point-to-point approach to providing protection in the region, to working to increase then the presence in their own community. So in conclusion, efforts are underway in the North Central America to help the children, especially as they are internally displaced within their own communities. The values and principles at the heart of these prevention strategies should affirm the developmental needs and well-being of children and make the best interest of the child their primary consideration. I applaud this initiative, and I am very happy to continue supporting in increasing the protection of our internally displaced children, as it is one step that we can and should be taking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The innovation in public policy, and not only within individual countries, but across the region, that's a helpful perspective to remember. So much more to do in that regard across borders as well, which brings us nicely to Nikki Enerson, who is the acting deputy director for the Inclusive Development Hub at the U.S. Agency for International Development, where she leads the Children, Youth, and Families team and the Indigenous Peoples Program. Nikki also previously served with the USAID mission in Guatemala. So Nikki, Samantha Power, the USAID administrator, visited Georgetown in November to commemorate the 60th anniversary of USAID. And it was then that she announced a 5-year, $300 million initiative, Centroamérica Local, which aims to empower local organizations in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to address the drivers of irregular migration to the United States and advance the Biden-Harris administration's root causes strategy. In her address, she urged us to amplify the local voices of those who too often have been left out of the conversation, including young people. She said, local voices need to be at the center of everything we do. We've got to tap into the knowledge of local communities and their lived experiences. Otherwise, we risk reinforcing the systemic inequities that are already in place. So maybe you can speak to how USAID is tapping into the knowledge of local communities, particularly when it comes to addressing the root causes of young people's migration.
Thanks so much for the question, Gillian. I want to start out by thanking Georgetown and you in particular for bringing us all together today. This has been a really fantastic discussion already. So thanks for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Nikki, and I currently lead USAID's Children, Youth, and Family team based in the Inclusive Development Hub here in DC. What that means is that we, our team, I see John on the line who works with me, we work globally to support our colleagues that manage USAID programs in more than 100 countries. I'm also a Foreign Service Officer, which means that every few years I move jobs and work from a different embassy. I mention that just as a side note, just if there are any students in this group that are interested in USAID's Foreign Service, send me an email. I'd be really happy to talk to you about it. So like you mentioned, my last position before this was as youth coordinator for USAID in Guatemala. So today I'm going to give you some Guatemalan examples as I discuss 3 of USAID's policies relevant to our discussion. So the 3 policies or strategies rather, the first one is the USG strategy to address the root causes of migration from Central America. The next 2 are upcoming strategies. I'm giving you some advance notice on localization and youth, which are very relevant to our conversation. So let me just start out. So of course, the best part of my time in Guatemala was speaking with young people. As people in Guatemala like to say, patojos chispuros, really bright young people. You know, as you go around meeting young people, looking at USAID projects and listening to them, you know, we'd exchange opinions and experiences about many, many topics, including, of course, migration. In conversations, young people gave me many different reasons for their personal experiences with migration. When they're thinking about if they migrate, why they migrated, why others in their families migrated. And as Juan Jose had discussed earlier, often it's a search for economic opportunities. People would talk about comparison. In rural Guatemala, you might earn $10 a day in common occupations where youth find themselves, like working in a coffee field or construction. And then they look at maybe making upwards of $10 an hour in the US. And so like the economic is a big part of it. Another reason as presented in the Oyame video, which is fantastic, by the way, is family reunification. You know, young people want to go and meet their parents who they haven't seen in a long, long time, or other family members. Another reason often given is that young people sometimes are becoming parents themselves, and they feel compelled to move in order to provide for their families. I heard a number of stories of young women who became pregnant and outside of as single mothers, and they were given a choice. Okay, either you migrate or you have to get married. Even if you don't want to get married, you have to get married. And then, of course, many would cite violence, both domestic and gang violence, as a push factor. But the reasoning that I heard the most throughout my 3 years in Guatemala was that yo quiero ser alguien en la vida. I have to migrate if I want to make something of myself. So I love visiting USAID youth projects to see how young people were working to do exactly this, to make something of themselves in their hometowns, in their home regions in Guatemala. And so I just wanted to tell you a couple of examples of young people who I saw doing this. So one that comes to mind was in Chiantla, always in rural Guatemala. That's where I spent a lot of my time. And I had the opportunity to learn about a young farmer who learned how to grow stevia, you know, the sweetener you put in, well, I put in my tea. He learned how to grow it. He found a market, and then he started showing his peers about how to grow and market this relatively new crop. Another example is a mattress factory that I visited in Xela, run by 2 young brothers who were returned migrants and wanted to provide an opportunity to employ people back home in Xela. And finally, and one of my favorites is of a young female mechanic, an auto mechanic from Huehue, who went to school with USAID support. And then after she honed her skills, she got a job in an auto mechanic shop locally. These young people all partnered with USAID, and they showed their peers and inspired their peers how they can make their way at home. So it's critical for USAID and what we call host country government or local government leaders to listen to the needs and ideas of young people, to learn from their efforts to solve the problems of their communities, and for us to empower them and support them to get the skills they need to persevere and to succeed at home and lead the way. So supporting and listening to young people is at the heart of USAID's youth policy, the first of the 3 policies I wanted to mention. And I'll try and put the links in the chat to these policies later on if anyone's interested. So the next strategy that I want to discuss is the root causes strategy. It acknowledges that irregular migration from Central America is the result of a complex interrelated system of factors. The strategy focuses on addressing both the short and long-term impediments to peaceful, prosperous, and stable communities. This, just following on in this discussion points that others have made already, it's very, very similar, very much in line. So this includes reducing poverty through creating job opportunities while also training youth for these market opportunities. So looking at the supply in terms of training young people with the relevant skills and the demand, creating jobs or looking at where there are opportunities to start entrepreneurship, supply and demand. It also includes improving citizen security and anti-gang initiatives, both through improving transparency and equity in governance, like Juan Jose was talking about earlier, looking at corruption, and addressing community violence through a public health approach, as Mark had mentioned. I see it as treating violence as an infectious disease from the moment of infection, and then treating it along the way. Like he said, the 9 months of TB treatments. I love that example. So USAID programs also focus on broader problems such as climate change, gender and ethnic inequalities. These factors all lead to the decision many make to seek safety and economic stability elsewhere. I also want to highlight the importance of including child protection, family strengthening, and positive youth development in this work, which is focused on increasing well-being and reducing migration. This is especially true for any efforts to reintegrate returned youth and children. Therefore, USAID also invests in approaches like positive parenting activities and is working with local ministries to strengthen the services and capabilities of social workers to reach vulnerable children and families. For example, our programs work to change behaviors through cognitive behavioral therapy with youth, to increase communication within families, and to provide support to economically vulnerable families. Our efforts to improve well-being must look not only at the needs of an individual, but also of the family units and the needs of the parents in relationship to the children. So USAID's objective in Central America is to increase opportunities and to improve well-being or bienestar for marginalized Central Americans who do not feel that they're able to live their best lives at home. It means both making real change in development outcomes, looking at things like dropout rates in school, household income, improving roads, reducing malnutrition, as well as in the perceptions of well-being. And this is really important. We've all heard of the American dream, right? The possibility to become more, that anyone can reach their dreams in the US. Part of the work of USAID is to partner with Guatemalans and other Central Americans, especially youth, to create and communicate what in Guatemala we call Ensueño Chapín. For example, the Puentes Project identified job opportunities for youth in the Western Highlands. They then trained youth for these jobs. Remember the supply and demand. But then they also worked to create a series called Quédate Aquí. They worked with a popular actress, Maria Mercedes, and a filmmaker, Jairo Bustamante. I'll give you the links to some of their films. They're fantastic if you haven't seen them yet. And this series, Quédate Aquí, in a really beautiful way, demonstrated economic opportunities in each region of the country. And you can just see the pride, in each region. Quédate Aquí, in a way, there are opportunities. These are the things which are available here. Really beautiful. So also talking about creating the Sueño Chapín. And finally, USAID also works with young artists who make murals, music, poetry, just like the drawings that we see here today. And these young artists talk about Guatemala, talk about migration, talk about development opportunities at home and the challenge, showing the Sueño Chapín. Finally, before I stop, I want to talk about the third policy. So I want to shift more towards talking about local partnerships. Partnership is critical to the work of USAID. We must partner and listen to communities, families, Indigenous authorities, Indigenous organizations, as well as government officials, NGOs, faith-based, community-based organizations, everybody, right? Partnership and listening is a vital part of working to improve well-being or bienestar in Central America. USAID staff and projects are guided to do this partnership by that third policy, the localization policy. So USAID will be looking to shift more, to be working more with local partners to shift leadership and decision-making to local institutions which possess the capability and credibility to drive change in Guatemala. As Gillian mentioned, this is a vision that was outlined by USAID's Administrator Samantha Power when she visited Guatemala through the Centro America Local initiative. It's only through an equitable and sustainable response to these challenges, built upon the priorities and experiences of the people who live them every day, that we can secure the safe and dignified lives of young Guatemalans. And I'll leave you with a few examples of some of these new partnerships, and I'm happy to talk about them further if wanted. So some of the new partnerships include a partnership on anti-trafficking with El Refugio de la Niñez, supporting the Secretaría de Bienestar Social, basically the Ministry of Welfare, new partnerships with Indigenous organizations through projects called IPART and CHEM, directly working with Indigenous organizations and Indigenous authorities on capacity building of organizations, as well as increasing the communication between the government of Guatemala and the Indigenous communities and authorities. New National Volunteer Service Corps, which is about to be launched in Guatemala and Honduras. And finally, working on women's economic empowerment. And one example is through a new partnerships with dozens of local organizations through something called Mujer Prospera. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the conversation to follow.
Thank you, Nikki. Always good to hear about you, and thanks for the heads up on the upcoming policies. We'll look forward to seeing how USAID is innovating in public policy as our Central American government neighbors are doing as well. Those are excellent examples, and thanks for feeding it back to the importance of listening to the communities and the young people themselves. Let us know as that happens, and we would look forward to highlighting the work that USAID is doing to do that. We have about 10 minutes for conversation. Maybe we can take down the beautiful doodle. It's been great. Thank you for sketching our conversation. And we'll bring back the panelists onto the screen. So if you've checked out your video, bring yourselves back. And I know that in our earlier conversation, when we were talking about how we wanted to handle this, there were some questions between the panelists. So I invite you to ask each other questions, or if you see some questions in the chat that you wish to share with one another, please feel free to do that too. Where are our speakers, our panelists? Are you all there?
I can start with a question if it's okay.
Sure.
Awesome. So I'm really thinking about mental health. I think it's on everyone's minds these days with the COVID situation, right? But I think it's especially relevant as we talk about families, children, and young people with migration. Juan Jose really spoke about the shocks, the loss of culture, community, identity, language, as well as the trauma of the journey. I know that we saw in the Óyeme, there was a young person talking about, I don't even know my mother. You know, like there's some mental health issues in there to unpack as we're looking at this migration thing. And I remember speaking with many young people who were deported, who their communities and families had invested in them. They chose the best and the brightest from their communities and said, we trust you. We're investing in you. We're taking a debt for you to travel. We expect you're going to send home $200 every month. After 5 years, you're going to come back. We're going to have this business. You know, there's a whole community plan. So my question is, so people come back and they feel like failures when they're deported, or if they weren't able to do it, you know, so there's just so many mental health issues in there. So I just wanted to throw the question out to the panelists about what can we do? What do we need to do? What is like the responsibility of governments and other actors to do around mental health and psychosocial support, so that 20 years from now, this crisis around trauma hasn't, you know, exploded to something else, and it does fuel the reason that people feel they need to leave.
Anyone? Juan Jose, can I invite you to take that question, or anyone else who would like to respond?
Bueno, yo creo que lo primero es darle la importancia que tiene y que haya consistencia en los programas de gobierno. Porque, por ejemplo, en algún momento los consulados guatemaltecos incluyeron psicólogos como parte del personal del consulado. Sin embargo, esta iniciativa no ha tenido continuidad. Y un reto para nosotros es cómo se logra institucionalizar, porque con esta volatilidad, llamémosle, de funcionarios. Un día están unos, otro día están otros, otro día están otros, y no hay políticas de Estado como tal que realmente le den esa prioridad a la salud mental. Y creo que otra cosa que tiene que cambiar es el enfoque para que sea una atención no de psicología clínica, sino de atención psicosocial y con un enfoque cultural. En las comunidades hay personas que cumplen esa labor de guías, de orientadores, por ejemplo, los IHAB, las comadronas, y entonces reforzar esto, basarnos en la comunidad. Creo que si le apostamos a las comunidades, tendremos comunidades más sanas. Esa sería mi respuesta.
Thank you, thank you. Mayu, you had an interesting question about youth entrepreneurship.
Yes, thank you so much. I believe one of the aspects when we're looking for dignity and mental health also for our youth, and that dignity and that, you know, self-assurance of themselves, unfortunately, we think we always prepare yourself for a job, but jobs are not necessarily enough in our region. You know, in El Salvador, maybe we can have about 15,000 jobs generated a year by the private sector, but you have 60,000 youth graduating from schools. So we have to introduce more and more of youth entrepreneurship in a sense of how to support them in a way that they can themselves generate their own livelihood and thus be able then also to accompany part of their family with these innovative, you know, enterprises. And part of the problem back home, also in Central America, 70% of the economy is informal. So these entrepreneurs, many of them come into the informality with no security networks. So how, I asked the panelists, do you envision entrepreneurship also as a facility for you know, the dignity and empowerment of our youth? And how do you envision it also as part of your programs? Thank you.
Anyone? Mark, do you want to take that? Youth entrepreneurship. No pressure.
No, I mean, obviously, if the local conditions permit, it's ideal. But the numbers or the evidence we see in Honduras and things, the numbers are pretty slow. Because I think what a lot of us keep forgetting is in a lot of the communities, organized crime's in charge. You know, so if you make more money being somehow involved in the drug or extortion trade, doesn't matter how innovative youth entrepreneurship can be, you're not going to get the same amount of cash. And we also have to recognize there's a lot of entrepreneurs in organized crime. To be good in organized crime, you basically have to be an entrepreneur. One of the discussions I had with Honduran youth up in Ceiba when I was exploring innovation in youth entrepreneurship, you know, what are you guys doing? Is there anything you guys could do on the right side of the law and you could earn some more money? They said, yeah, we'd love to learn how to refurbish burner phones because our city's full of burner phones, you know, and if UNICEF can provide technical support so we can get burner phones back on a market, you know, it was very sophisticated, the ask. So there are spaces there, but the organized crime economy is pretty competitive and pays pretty well. So we got to know what we're up against.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that Mayu had a great point, if I can add in too. And I know in Guatemala, we talk about 50,000 new jobs coming on the market or 50,000 positions opening up every year, but 150,000 people entering the workforce looking for those jobs. You know, and so entrepreneurship absolutely has to be part of what we're talking about. But I think that when you're supporting a young person to become an entrepreneur in an area that's quite violent, you have to think about security as well. Are you setting them up to have to pay bribes? Are they going to get robbed? You know, like all of these sorts of things that we have to consider when we're, especially like where I'm sitting, managing US government resources and taxpayer funds, that you have to look out for all of these potential issues along the way. But I think entrepreneurship and innovation has to be a part of this discussion for sure.
Absolutely. Lorena Brady from the International Mayan League posed an important question about Indigenous rights. And Juan Jose, maybe you can speak a little bit about the intersection between, the struggle for Indigenous recognition and Indigenous rights and child protection. Can you link those a little bit? You did in your comments, but I'm wondering if you can help us wrap that up a little bit.
Bueno, nosotros hablamos de la historia que nos permite entender el presente. Y esta historia es una historia de racismo, de despojo, de explotación, de mucha discriminación. Entonces, justamente es el despojo de los territorios de los pueblos indígenas lo que ha provocado el desplazamiento. De manera que efectivamente, si queremos un desarrollo desde lo local, tenemos que reconocer a las autoridades indígenas, tenemos que reconocer el derecho al autogobierno y a la decisión de los pueblos. Entonces creo que sí, hay perspectivas de desarrollo desde lo local, si se hace este reconocimiento y volvemos a la pregunta, al tema inicial. Si la gente tiene condiciones para vivir en su territorio, no va a abandonar su territorio. Por lo tanto, hay que apostarle al desarrollo territorial, reconociendo a las comunidades indígenas.
So before we close, we're going to end with the voices of young children, but I also want to thank all of the people who've helped us bring this forum together, including, of course, our panelists. Thank you for being protection innovators in the midst of extraordinarily challenging situations. And thanks for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. It's been truly an honor to have you to start this conversation series with us. Thanks to our collaborative design team members. I mentioned in the beginning that this was a joint project. Rodrigo Barraza from Global Fund for Children, Elizabeth Ferris from Georgetown, Rhonda Fleischer from UNICEF, Frecia Guzman from Identity, Joanne Seelig from Imagination Stage, and Kelly Ezekazea from UNICEF USA. And to the Georgetown team who's been helping behind the scenes, Nikki Wantakan Arcado, Isaiah Cruz has done all the translations for our blog, Mary Gordon, Julia Morillo, Shemeng Tong, and Amy van der Vliet. And thanks also to our interpreters and our graphic facilitator, Alfredo Sanchez Bedoya. So we began this conversation with a story shared by young people through a scene from Oyame, a play they helped to create. And we're going to close with 3 short reflections shared from migrant and asylum-seeking youth who recently arrived in Montgomery County. Their stories are narrated here by voice actors to protect their identity, but they're directly taken from their intakes with Identity, the organization serving them in Montgomery County. So we're grateful to Identity and Imagination Stage, Theater for Change, for bringing their voices into our space. May these young people's words and perspectives stay front and center as we continue this conversation and our work. Thank you all. Mary, if you can play the video or the audio, please. Thanks.
How hard we work, sometimes there's no food. And we don't have anything to eat when there's no food. No tenemos nada que comer si no hay comida. Not for me or the younger ones. Soy la mayor. I'm the oldest. Mis hermanitos are 12, 11, 9, 7, 5, and 2. But I'm the oldest, so I come here a buscar trabajo to make money, to send back home, because sometimes back there's no food. But I can help out Mami y Papi. If I work hard up here, then maybe everyone can eat.
Usually people die. La gente se muere. I don't know if Tia knew that before she told me to go. They can be left for dead if they get sick, or they can be murdered. That's what it's like on the journey. A month of wondering if you will be one of those people. Tia might not have realized that. A lo mejor Tia no sabía. She wanted me to get away. Because there, back home, the gangs do many things. The gangs kill many people. Dijo que tendría una vida mejor. She said it would be a better life. And she pays $4,000 to send me here. But maybe she doesn't know that usually people die on their way here. I lived with Tia before I came here, and Tia is nice enough. Not like Mama. Mama liked her husband and my little sister more than she liked me. She said kind things to everyone else, but spoke vulgar to me. Are all mothers like that? So she sent me to live with Tia, and Tia sent me here.
Situations. I came here because of situations. Perdimos a papi. We lost papi. I went to work in Guatemala City. For 3 or 4 years, I was trying to finish school there. Then Mami gets sick. I look after the young ones, hermanitos, 2 girls and a boy. Mami has surgery and I help. Pero quiero ayudarla más. But I want to help more. So I leave for a better future, to become something and send money back and help. I leave for a better future.